I thought that I will never figure out this plant. Hello everyone, my name is Adina from plantsbutbetter and I really need to cut my bangs these days. Moving on, today I have with me this beautiful plant, Philodendron Squamiferum, and today you'll find out everything there is to know about its care. So I have a love-hate relationship with this plant because for the longest time it just didn't grow. I have this plant for more than a year and in the first 6 to maybe more months it didn't grow one single leaf. And that was very frustrating. And that's why I will give it a 6 out of 10 for the care meter, because if you really don't know what you're doing, you're gonna spend some time figuring out where this plant needs to be placed and what does it need to finally grow one leaf. And speaking of growing leaves, let's talk about light, because this is the number one thing that needs to be mentioned. If you want your philodendron to give you shiny new leaves like this one, you really need to place it in bright indirect light or help it with a grow light. Philodendron Squamiferum won't grow if it doesn't get enough light. It just won't. I mean, I tried moving it around in different places until I finally had the perfect spot. After more than 6 months without having any new growth, I thought that I will never figure out this plant until I placed it right under a grow light, and then it finally grew one leaf, and then another one, and then another one. And soon I'll have another one in here as well. And by the way, don't touch your plants, especially new growing leaves, because they don't like that. Moving on to watering, when it's best and when it's not. So I water my philodendron when the soil is almost completely dry. And I advise you to do the same if your home is a bit colder. It's very important to always check the soil before you water it. When it was shipped to me, unfortunately I got it with root rot because the soil was very wet and the temperatures were not helping either. And I think it was last November or something. But anyway, you don't know when I'm recording this, so you don't know which November. And I think this may be again one of the problems why it didn't get me any growth in the first 6 months. Yeah, I never thought about that until now. Anyway, you can try water your philodendron maybe once every 10 days during summer and stretch your time to 14 days during winter. Usually in the winter time your plants go through dormancy and they don't need that much water. So be careful because this plant is prone to root rot and it doesn't like soggy soil. Moving on to temperature, it's best to keep it above 20 degrees Celsius. If you can go somewhere around 23 to even more, it's great. Don't let it drop below 15 degrees because this plant is very sensitive to cold. And again, lower temperatures lead to root rot. Well, I've experienced root rot with this plant, so I'm gonna keep saying that until you realize that this is a real problem that you can have anytime. Doesn't matter how skilled you are, doesn't matter your home conditions. If you don't pay a bit of attention, you might lose your plant. I might shut up about those morbid things like root rot and move on to humidity. As it's the case with most philodendrons, this one needs a little bit more humidity. So somewhere around 50 to 60 or maybe even higher, it's great. If you can't provide that, you can always use your home as a laundry room. Maybe that didn't sound well, but that does help sometimes. Stick to a humidifier that is even more aesthetically pleasing and is way more efficient. What about fertilizer? How often should you feed your plant? I feed my plants every month during growing season, and usually in the winter I stop. Because again, winter is associated with dormancy and they don't grow, so they don't need any feeding. I use a balanced NPK ratio of 10-10-10 or 20-20-20, but you can go with almost anything. So don't worry about the NPK, worry about the over-fertilizing because that could cause trouble as well. Moving on to substrate. Please use something very lightweight. A mix, for example, is cocoa coir with some perlite and some orchid barks or pine barks. This philodendron has very tiny and fragile roots, and you don't want to be using a heavy soil, and you also wouldn't want your roots to stay in water for too long. Let's make a count to see how many times I say root rot in this video. It's very important that your substrate does a great job in the water drainage. That's how you will keep your roots healthy. And whatever you choose for your mix, Please don't use just regular potting soil because that's too heavy, and at least add some perlite. That will make a difference. Moving on to plastic versus terracotta. And I think you can definitely grow this plant in both. I only tried it in plastic, but I've seen cases in which this is grown in terracotta. I think it's actually better to grow it in terracotta because that kind of pot is porous and will help the water evaporate faster, and you will not have any problems with root rot. And yeah, that's all I had to say on this segment. Moving on to repotting. Repot your Philodendron Squamiferum only when it's strictly necessary. If you see it outgrown the pot, I mean when the roots are coming out of the drainage holes, like massively coming out of the drainage hole, not just a tiny root, then it's time to move out. I don't think you'll do this more than once in a couple of years or something. Choose a pot slightly bigger, choose your favorite lightweight mix, and then you're good to go. What about propagation? How can I get a big fat family with this plant? The best way for this philodendron is by stem cuttings. So you basically need segments that will contain at least one node. You can place them into water, or you can place them in sphagnum moss, and you're good to go. Another way of propagation is by air layering. So for that you'll need again sphagnum moss. I think you can do it with coco coir as well. You need to keep the substrate moist so the aerial roots will grow. And you can do it with leafless cuttings as well, but then again you need a viable node. Place them in a clean container with some sphagnum moss or some coco coir, and then spray them with some water because humidity will help your new roots grow. Place them into a zip bag and just wait. Well, check the zip bag from time to time to see if there is any mold or if there is any rotting situation, but you'll have new plants anyway, so whatever you choose, it's up to you. I find that the easiest way to do it is by stem cuttings placed into water. Moving on to pests. Fortunately, I didn't have a lot of problems with this plant. I think the only time I got panicky a bit is when I thought I saw some thrips, but I got rid of them with some treatments. And I would say that you should pretty much be looking for thrips because these parasites are very hard to get rid of. And if you had trouble in the past with other kind of pests, you can leave it in the comments because I would really love to know. But yeah, prevention is the best thing you can do. So check your plant every time you water it. Moving on from pests to pets. And unfortunately, this plant is not pet friendly, so I would advise you to keep it away from any curious pet. Oh, I forgot to tell you about this leaf. So if you've never seen transit damage before, this is how it looks like. This is the oldest leaf, but I didn't really cut it because I don't mind it. It's healthy overall. It's still viable for photosynthesis, so why should I cut it? Meanwhile, the leaf with the transit damage died on its own. It lived a happy life. And yeah, if you don't mind them, just keep them, especially if your plant doesn't have a lot of new leaves. So I could cut this one with no problem, but if your plant has maybe 1 or 2 more leaves, I would keep it until it will grow a bit bigger. I love the fuzzy petioles, I love the shape of the leaves, I love how it looks like. But then again, you must know that this plant is pretty pretentious in my point of view. So yeah, you've been warned. Oh, and another thing that I want to point out in this video is that sometimes you may see on your plants some sticky little droplets. And those droplets are actually nectar. That doesn't mean they got any pests. That is normal and it's just a natural defense mechanism. So there is no need to worry if you see that on your plant. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I actually have my plant on a very tiny improvised moss pole. I like it because now it grows straight up instead of being very droopy. And if you keep your pole moist, you can favor the growth of aerial roots. And that is very handy if you want to propagate your plant. And I think that's kinda it. If you have any interesting facts that I didn't mention, you can leave them in the comments. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up because this will help a lot to spread the message. And until next time, don't forget to take care of yourself and your plants.